Good morning, and good morning to everybody watching us now online, of course, because this is a live stream with somebody who has been on our podcast before and who is a very special guest, of course. I'm sure that if you are on LinkedIn, you have already met James. And
Mm.
you have probably connected with him behind the scenes as well, because he is a great storyteller, and also he has been in Japan and a member of the Japanese or the foreign community here in Japan for quite a while now. And well, recently he came up with an idea about a storytelling event, which is going to take place next week. But I will leave James to tell us about the event, and of course why storytelling is so important, and of course how James became. Interested in storytelling and so on. So, James, welcome to the podcast, and thank you so very much for sparing time for being here today.
Oh, thank you. Thank you very much, Maya. I appreciate the opportunity to chat again. This is always kind of fun. So I wish our friend Tim was here, but that's fine. I actually, your Tim is the way I met Tim, and we've never met in person. Actually, also is funny because it was because of a story he wrote and published. I think it was on Medium that I was reading during COVID, and that's actually how I connected to him originally. So
Yeah. So I know that our viewers were excited when they saw the thumbnail that Tim would be here. Unfortunately, Tim is not able to be with us today because of a cold. Well, we hope that he recovers quickly,
mm,
and there will be other chances for him to be here again. So today it will be James and me on the podcast. I hope that you all enjoy the conversation. And of course, if you have comments, if you have questions, if you want to share your thoughts, please do that in the comment section. It's going to be a pleasure to read them. And yes, so just do that. Go ahead and be with us. So, James, first of all, I know that you have been in Japan for quite a while, and I just don't remember the right amount of years. I don't think it's so important, but for
mm.
everybody who is probably curious, could you share that with us? And maybe from there we can move into storytelling.
Yeah, that sounds great. I've been here now about 10 and a half years. And the funny thing is, I feel like a newbie compared to others, like probably yourself and even Tim because of his experience. Even though this is, I think, his second time living in Japan. But yeah, I always meet people in the expat community who have been here so much longer than me. So I, I keep thinking of myself as the person who just arrived. And even though, yeah, 10 and a half years, I guess, is a little bit of a while.
I guess it is, yes.
Mm,
And a lot of things happen in 10 years. They can happen, right? Japan is
mm,
changing too. I
mhm.
guess that we all are noticing this, even though some skeptics, they always say, "Oh, yeah, nothing changes here." We are seeing all these changes in front of our eyes, and
Yeah.
who knows what happens next, right?
Mm,
So
mm,
changes everywhere. It's in the number of foreigners who come to Japan, the number of foreigners who come to live here and work here, of course. It's
mm,
also in, well, in politics, for good or
mm,
for bad. We don't know that, but
mm,
we'll see what happens there. And
mm.
I also think that, of course, Tokyo is changing as well, because when I walk the streets of the city, I see so many new buildings here. I'm sure that
Yeah.
some of them have been designed and probably built by the company you work for, right?
A
So
lot of, yeah.
a lot of
It's,
them.
yeah, it's true. Yeah, it's interesting, the construction going on in Japan, but also this idea of change happening slow and
Mhm.
or never happening, some people might say in Japan. But I think it's it's also the same elsewhere. I mean, change doesn't occur literally overnight, but at the same time, I think we are all aware of one thing across Asia is that when change is accepted and adopted, and whether it's policy or as you say, politics or something is decided, it tends to happen quite quickly. It tends to be
Yes.
adopted by the population very quickly, and whatever that change might be. So But I think we love to say, I love to say it now because I think I only read this last year that Japan is that country that has been stuck in 2000, the year 2000 since 1980. And I love that saying because I remember the feeling of Japan being so far ahead and advanced, or at least it was a perception I had coming here for the first time in the 90s. But I do believe Japan is changing and adapting to the socioeconomic forces that are occurring right now. Um,
Mm.
but yeah, it's not going to just flip on a dime and change overnight. Um, so
The,
that's why,
oh,
yeah,
yeah, it's
I'm
interesting
building
because,
change.
right, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. No, it's interesting because when I came to Japan in 2001, and of course, Japan looked like that high-tech nation, of course, back then, for
Mm,
somebody coming from an Eastern
mm,
European country, and so on and so on. And then in
mm,
2008, I remember reading white papers and also communiques by the ministries here in Japan, saying that they were their goal was to actually turn Japan into an internet society. And I
mm,
was thinking, wow, give me a break. What does that mean? But just a couple of years later, through my work, I realized that there was so much information already online, and of course. I mean, a lot of people used that information here in Japan. And
mm,
I say that because when we worked with a partner from Europe back then, we just, that partner didn't know that
mm,
information they expected us to know was not available online,
mm.
right? So it was about, yes. So, and basically, that information which they wanted us to know was the information about their national borders, right?
Uh,
So it was a new country, a newly formed country in Eastern Europe. And the
mm,
thing that happened was that when our member companies went online and looked for the borders of that new country, the borders were not on Google Maps. They were nowhere to be found, right? And then, of course, the ambassador of that country came to us and he was very upset. Like, how couldn't you know that we are a newly formed country and we have these and these and these borders? And then I told them, yes, but it's basically your government's responsibility to inform Google Maps and the
mm.
relevant ministry to inform Google Maps so that the borders would be indicated on their maps there. But still,
Interesting.
it is interesting, yes, because and of course the ambassador didn't agree with me, so it was but it happened anyway. And then I realized that the whole idea and the goal the ministries had here to turn Japan into an internet society was happening for
Mm.
Japan as a nation, but it wasn't
Uh,
happening for other countries.
I see. That's interesting.
Hmm.
Yeah. So they did make change quickly, probably in that area, or at
Yeah.
least you saw it.
Yes, I
Yeah.
saw it, and to the point you made that once a change is decided and that everybody is on board, it
Mm,
happens in a very short period of time
mm.
because everybody moves together. It's a concerted effort, right?
Yeah. Agreed. Agreed. Yeah. That's interesting. Yeah, it's kind of related to this idea of starting a storytelling community because the whole idea behind that movement that I'm pushing, I guess, in a way, is really just simply that I couldn't find one in Tokyo to be really. I was. I had made a concerted effort this year to join more things, to participate more externally. I had kind of retreated into habits of just being with my family every evening early. I don't stay at work late ever when I do go to the office, so I was looking around for a storytelling community just to see what there might be in Tokyo. And I did find the comedy club or something like that,
Mm.
and I didn't go to it, but I might have attended one a long time ago. But I was looking for something different than the comedy club, and
Hmm.
I think comedy certainly includes story elements all the time, but it's not storytelling and it's not the kind of storytelling I was really looking for. So might as well start one is my next thought.
All right. Mm.
And my wife said, "Why would you do all this work, for something like that?" And I used uh, I used a statement that the orange buffoon leading America recently said. I think it was something like, um, what was it? Nothing bad can happen. It can only good happen. So, so that's why I started it.
Okay. Yeah, it's a lot of work indeed when you try to get people together, especially in, well,
Yeah,
at times like today and places like
yeah,
Tokyo, where everybody has their own thing to do, right?
yeah. I'm not an event organizer really, and I learned a lot organizing this, hundreds of hours, and just just not being an event organizer. I'm used to. I told the venue, which Tim introduced to me, by the way, but that which is Baird Beer, the Nakamaguro tap room. But I told them I'm used to just showing up at a pub like that and bringing my musical equipment in and setting up, playing, and leaving, and that's as much event organizing as I know. So yeah, so it's new to me.
Yeah. Yeah, I imagine that getting everybody on board takes time. At the same time, I'm sure that the Beard Brewery, they will do
Mm.
everything possible to make you and the participants in the event feel comfortable and enjoy the event.
Oh
So,
yeah, they really have been great. They have been really wonderful.
mm,
Super super happy with that arrangement because yeah, they've accommodated all my stupid questions and all my I went there twice now and checking things out like sound system and lighting and all kinds of things, just crazy questions because I just never done this before. But yeah, so I told my wife, I said if I do another one of these storytelling events, which I'm really leaning towards doing, for a couple reasons, but one of them is because all the work is done. If the
mhm,
venue allows us to repeat this again, it'll be so easy to use the same form works I've created, the speaker submission forms, the or storyteller submission forms, and the clearances that you need to get for photo rights and video recording and so on and so forth. And then also getting people to uh, submit their stories to me and work with them to review it and restructure it and redesign it. Not wordsmith it. That's one thing I don't do and won't do. But to suggest and the redesign of stories to help them become stronger.
mhm,
And something I actually do in my work as an architect at Niken is helping others tell the stories of their projects in a way that is compelling and it works. I think we don't always think of this, but storytelling, interestingly, isn't just for telling stories. In fact, I
mhm,
don't think I'm a very good storyteller. I think I'm a better um, story smith or story creator in terms of words and arrangement, but not telling the story. That's also a different craft than writing it, as you know. But even an email you're writing to a customer or an award you're applying for, or maybe it's a job you're applying for, all of those things can use the story structure and design to kind of make them resonate better with people. And that's the word I like to use the most is resonate. It's a musical reference, right, to this idea
mhm,
of resonation at the same frequency, and you could use harmony as well. But resonate, I think it's the title of one of the presentation design books too that is all about this idea of, I don't know if you've ever seen, have you ever seen this thing where it's an experiment where you take a black plate with salt on it or sand, and
I
then
have no.
like a bass tone frequency is played, and the salt or sand vibrates, but it always forms these beautiful patterns that are
Mhm,
perfectly geometrical. And people might wonder why that happens and how these elements align so perfectly in in patterns. And I think the same is actually true with humans and our hearts and minds, if you will. To when we hear a story that resonates with us, there's a different change in us that doesn't occur when you hear a story that's just so, or you can't. It might be a great story, but only to someone else and not
Right.
to you, because you don't either identify with the characters in the story or the hero. So it's kind of interesting because I got hooked on this idea maybe more than 17 years ago of understanding some of the neuroscience that we were learning at that time about storytelling and how our brains change with story. And it's really, really fascinating stuff. I'm not, I'm not, I'm not generally interested in neuroscience, but the neuroscience behind storytelling, at least at a high level, is what I was interested in knowing. Is how does that work and why does it work and what happens when we hear something that really resonates with us and how does it affect us and our decision making and so on. So yeah, I don't know. I should, yeah, I should back off when I the way I came to this storytelling over nearly 20 years ago was I joined Rocky Mountain Institute, which is a global nonprofit sustainability institute based in Colorado, and headed by Amory Lovins, who is I think recently retired. And and when I arrived there, amongst these really bright young minds, after nearly 20 years being an architect and thinking I had my stories down because we were able to pitch clients and win projects and, pitch design solutions for new buildings and get them built. And so I just, like every other architect who's a little bit arrogant, thought I just had it down. I know how to do this. And when
Mm-hmm.
I arrived there, I realized how bad I was because the people there had a elevated level of storytelling because of what they do and how they do their work as a think and do tank. They work globally on big giant energy issues, and you can't do that and make great change and actually implement change like that without very powerful storytelling. And Amory and the Rocky Mountain Institute were able to bring in some of the world class leaders in storytelling to teach our staff how to construct a deck or tell a story in a way that resonates with people. So that's what really got me started. And then I in addition to reading and writing, which we had to do for work, at least twice a quarter, publishing thought leadership. We I also decided to start listening to stories, and I had subscribed to a couple of podcasts like The Moth. If in fact, The Moth is what this storytelling event in Tokyo is going to be modeled after next week. Themoth.org, which I didn't realize was actually on YouTube until just a few weeks ago. I've only ever listened to Moth stories, which are basically true stories told live without notes, 5 minutes, and that's it. And in the Moth model, they are also coached and advised generally, especially for Moth Grand Slams, which are the winners of previous story slams come together to tell a Grand Slam story. And these are the best of the best storytellers. Um, and I found what's on YouTube recently is many people, many of the same people telling multiple stories because they're quite good at it. And I'm hoping that kind of happens here too. So I listened to thousands of stories from the Moth, 99% Invisible, and a couple other podcasts like Radio Lab, and those are all storytelling communities that have podcasts. And the reason I didn't just listen for the emotional impact, because I would be walking and hiking in Colorado, crying, on a trail, and or laughing out loud alone. Sure, people thought I was crazy, but I was also trying as hard as I could to dissect the story, to break it down into the common elements of any story. Some introductory context or place or time, where we are, where does the story begin, and then follow the story arc through the turning point and the rising tension and the problem, and why usually at the turning point we don't really solve the problem in a story. It's not fully resolved yet. Otherwise, the story would end at the turning point. And so that was harder to do than I thought, because I would become so emotionally engaged in the story that I couldn't listen to it objectively as story structure. I had to listen to them more than one time, some of them, and I would pick out the ones that most influenced me and mark them, and then go back to them, listen again with a notebook to try to understand the story structure and why it might have worked for me. So in doing that with architecture, I found that, yeah, again, as I said earlier, you can apply this kind of design principle of story to just about anything. If you're writing it and someone's going to read it, or you're telling it, even better, um, it can be a story structure. And it doesn't matter how short it is either. One of the things I like to use in some of my trainings at work at Niken is I'll put up a cartoon that I've translated to Japanese, and it'll be a one sentence cartoon. Like one of my favorites is a scene of a mother and father sitting at the kitchen table with their little boy, and the byline, or the English byline below, says something like, "Yes, we could read your blog, or you could tell us about your school day." And now we know the context is the kitchen at the dinner, most likely, not breakfast. It's school day. He has to tell about, and we can almost imagine what the consequences or the conclusion might be as well. If he doesn't tell his parents about his school day, he might not get to use his electronics or watch TV or whatever um, his activity he likes to do after dinner is. So this is a story, and because it has a picture element, it's easier to tell that story in one sentence, of course. But the idea behind the moth and these podcasts, of course, is no visuals. And that's one of the things. This is not Pechakucha. This is not stand-up comedy. This is not poetry slam. This is storytelling. Only true stories are accepted, and only stories where the person telling the story is the main character. It happened to them, and they experienced it. So yeah, we have lined up some really great storytellers for next week. And as you said earlier, Maya, it's sold out in really record time. I didn't expect it to go that fast. Um, so we sold out 50 tickets in, I don't know, a couple of weeks, or maybe 2.5 weeks or something like that. And 2 weeks before the show in any case. And now there's a number of people on a wait list. And I'm kind of encouraged, because not because it sold out so quick, but because many of the people who are going to be attending are chatting about it on LinkedIn and so forth, and making comments about identifying people who would be a great speaker or great storyteller in a future slam, but also saying, "Oh, darn, I'm sorry, I missed this. How do I find out about a future one?" And I haven't fully decided to do another one, but I'm leaning towards it, because I think there's enough interest to continue the idea of a storytelling community. And um, if in my mind, I guess I Googled this a few weeks ago. I wonder how many foreigners live in Tokyo. Do you know? I,
No, I don't have the
I looked
information.
it up. If it's correct, I just Googled it, but it says 757,000 foreigners live in Tokyo. And I just said,
Mhm.
well, for sure, half of those speak English. And if I had a vision that was bigger than what we're doing today, it would probably be that we would have story slams in Japanese and story slams in English. Although my fear is based on my experience with my colleagues at work, is I don't generally see a lot of our Japanese colleagues who haven't lived overseas sharing personal information. In other words, telling a true story, especially emotional story. And if a story doesn't have any emotion in it, there's no stakes. And if there's no stakes, there's no story. And so I find that might be a harder group to bring in, although two of my speakers or storytellers at the first slam are Japanese. So I'm very happy about that. And one of them will only be telling a story in English for the second time in her life. So
Mm.
that's really powerful for me, and I'm happy to see that. But yeah, I think if a community were able to grow from that number of population that is interested in storytelling and can speak English, maybe maybe there could be a nice pool of people who want to regularly get together and share stories, because there's something that happens as a gift, not only to the audience, but also for the storyteller. Many people who tell, especially emotional stories of loss or love or something that might have happened to them, they find that getting the story out, because they've never written it or they've not told many people outside of their close friends, um, but publicly getting it out, they feel some kind of release. I'm not a psychotherapist, or I'm afraid to do therapy because I'm afraid of what I might dig up. But so but I do think there is value in telling your story. But the audience most certainly gets a gift, and the gift we most commonly give when we tell a story is learning, of course, no knowledge of something. And when we interpret a story and we hear how the speaker, the storyteller, reacted or responded to the situation they were in a story, we imagine ourselves in that story as either them or as someone else in the story. And we pick up on this idea that how would I respond in that situation? And this is why really super interesting when a storyteller is telling an engaging story for you, then what happens in your brain is actually identical to what happened to the storyteller's brain when that event happened to them, or what's happening in their brain as they're telling it to you now. Your brains are mirrored, which is really, really interesting in the neuroscientific community. Because generally, if we're just talking about data and facts, what happens is we use only two parts of our brain, the Broca in the frontal part of our brain and the Wernicke in the back. And these two parts of the brain only focus on language comprehension. So just understanding language, whatever language it might be in, which of course is harder if you're living in a culture that's not your native language, but it's still language comprehension and understanding, just understanding like what this is supposed to mean. So mostly data and facts do this to us when we're at work, or we're just
Right.
reading or hearing something about basic information. Although what I try to teach at work as well is this idea that we can take data and facts and turn them into a story, and back it up with your boring charts if you want to, or your boring facts on a slide. But more importantly, start with the story that includes references to the data
Yeah.
in a simpler way.
Yes, to a couple of points that you mentioned. The first one is that I remember it was already more than 15 years ago. At home, we started looking for a place to move. And we
Mm.
went to different showrooms. And the ones I remember were the ones that got everybody gathered there, the people who were looking for a room. And they would show a short movie. And that short movie was basically a story of a family, right?
Mm.
Looking for something, for this or that,
Mm.
eventually having a difficulty finding it, and then going to
Right.
one of the properties that the company built, and having an aha moment. Oh, this is what we need, and so on and so on. So and it was interesting to me back then
Yeah.
because it is the simplest of stories. I mean,
Yeah.
basically you start with a
That,
problem, you look for a solution, you have an aha moment,
yeah.
and then the conclusion comes after that, right?
I
So
love it.
yeah, and that was interesting because back then I told my husband they're using stories, to impact our decisions, and he was like, "Oh, really?"
Right. That's right. And
So
did you think badly of that? I mean, did you think, I mean, Hitler used stories to influence people badly, but
oh yes, yeah, everybody does. But the thing is that some people, once again, I said it, but I will repeat that those are the times that I remember, and the
right,
buildings we saw, I
right,
remember. I don't
right.
remember the others, even though I was fully aware that they were actually using the story with the single goal of influencing our
Wow.
decision, right?
Wow.
I was
Yes.
fully aware of that, and still my brain remembers those, and
That's interesting.
it doesn't remember the others. So
That's
even
right.
when you know how it works, and that's also I will use the word manipulation, but I don't
Mm.
mean it in the bad sense of the word,
Yeah,
right?
yeah, Yeah, yeah,
Even
I
though
agree.
I knew that we were manipulated, still it worked. So,
That's exactly right. And what the neuroscientists say about that is this it's almost a joke, but it's a phrase that they'll use to convince people sort of neurons that fire together, and they do fire together when we're hearing a story, wire together. When we
right,
make cross connections in our brain through storytelling, because the brain activity, when you're hearing a story that, again, that resonates with you, if it doesn't resonate with you, this doesn't happen in your brain. But if you're really, really into the story and you're following it, there's a fivefold increase in brain activity
mm,
in you. And the storyteller is doing this as well. But what's happening is neurons are connecting that weren't connected. And the constant reconnection or connection of neurons is for remembering. And that's
right,
why there's so
mm,
much data that shows, research has shown over and over and over again, the length of time that students or a study group or a group can understand and remember a story versus the same information given in data and facts.
right.
And how long, and it's a really short period of time that we can remember data and facts. And this is why, by the way, I'm trying right now, I've just started working on a short design deck to convince my firm that we should stop, well, not stop, we should change the way we do ESG and DEI reports on our website. These PDFs that every company has, these corporate sustainability reports, and in social
Mm,
governance kind of environmental, and nobody reads them. I even asked how many downloads have we had, and they don't know because it's not tracked. And
uh,
and I said, well, why do we create them? I mean, other than compliance, we need to do it probably for shareholders or something like that. But why don't we have a movie making department in an architecture firm? We
mhm,
have 23 illustrators and animators. We could create a powerful, and I don't know if you saw, by the way, Apple Computers corporate sustainability report video. It's on YouTube. I think it's a little bit longer than 5 minutes. It might be 7 or 10 minutes, but it's really powerful. You have all your board leaders sitting around the table at Apple, and in walks Mother Nature, and she gets a
yeah, I
report
saw that
update
one.
from them.
Mm,
Okay, so this kind of idea, though, that we don't have to follow that model or that style, but the idea, if you're creating corporate sustainability reports, environmental and social governance reports, why not make it into a movie with a
yeah,
story structure in
right.
order to have greater impact, in order to have greater, if the purpose of it is to show people what you're doing and what you're still up against and you haven't accomplished, because I think that's the most important part of a report, by the way, isn't what we did last year. It's what we're going to do and why we haven't achieved our goals. So,
Yeah.
yeah. So anyway, that's another way to tell stories is through your corporate reports.
Right, but just I have a question to you because I
Mm,
noticed soon after I came to Japan actually that there is a difference in the way people tell stories. And
mm,
when I say people, I mean
mm.
obviously cultures,
Yeah,
because I come
that's
from
right.
the Western tradition, where everything in the fairy tales I grew up with is either black or white, it's either good or bad. So we have the
Uh,
superhero and we have the villain there.
yeah,
And right, so there is always a battle between them. There is that fight, there is that struggle, right, for the good
yeah,
to prevail. And of course, it's a different point that in the West, most of the fairy tales that were created in the past are about, well, they're more binary, right?
mm,
When I say binary, it's about, once again, these binary values like good, bad, good, evil,
mm,
hero, villain, and so on and so on. The Beauty and the Beast, right? You have
right,
it even in the title there. So, and there is always at the end of almost at the end of every fairy tale, there is, let's say, a conflict, right, between the two protagonists of the story.
mm,
And then, of course, always one of them, usually the good one, wins.
mm,
So when I came to Japan, though, and we went to Disney Sea,
uh,
and there was a show there, and then the show was on that pond they have among somewhere in the middle of the whole area, right? It was years and years ago, so I don't remember very well, the setting. But anyway, it was within that amusement park, and the show was like two different or three different boats with people on them, characters, okay, Disney
mm,
characters.
mm,
They were introduced by the MC of the show and saying, now, boat A comes out and we've got the good people here, or something like that. We've got Donald Duck and we've got whoever. And then boat B comes out. And now, and with all the aplomb, and all the building up of the tension, right?
yeah.
And for me, who had just come to Japan from the western side of the globe, I expected that there would be a battle there, right?
Mm,
That there
mm,
would be a conflict that would be resolved by, well, symbolic battle, of course.
mm,
And I was so, waiting for it to see who would win and so on. And eventually, the whole show finished with introducing the two different, obviously, let's say the, well, I would say different. They weren't even opposing each other, the boats,
right,
and they
right.
just went around the pond, right? There was
Yeah.
no battle, there was no conflict, there was no confrontation there,
Mm,
and and they disappeared back to the whatever, whatever you call that, and I
yeah.
was like, the first thing I said, to my husband back then was, I looked at him and asked him, "Is that all?"
No
And he
story.
said, "Yeah, no story." And he said,
Uh,
"Yes." And I said, "But this is unfinished. There was nothing here." And he said, "No, this is finished. This is okay because we also all the characters. They
yeah.
were introduced and they came around and they and I was like, wow." And so later on, of course, back then I didn't know much about Japanese culture, but later on I
Mm,
kept thinking about that. I still keep thinking about that, event,
uh,
basically. And I think that when you think about Japanese fairy tales, you don't usually have confrontation there. And the
mm,
characters there are so much more nuanced. It's not a binary opposition
yeah.
of the good and
Yeah.
the bad, the good and the evil.
Mm, mm,
And so the
yeah.
bad character is bad at some point of the story. Later on, that character is good,
Mm,
right? Depending on
yeah.
the situation. And that's leading, back to what I said. Different cultures tell stories in different ways.
Mm, yes, indeed. You're absolutely right. I don't know about Disney in and of itself, but I do know. I mean, obviously, those characters all have their own stories that they're part of, right? Each of those
Sure.
Disney characters, and all of those stories do have conflict and
Yes.
a good
Yes.
and bad. But like you
But
said, I learned this very quickly too when I came here, and Nika and colleagues, I would ask them about their kind of testing their knowledge of climate change and the climate crisis we're all living through, and I would find out that their knowledge was extremely limited. And when I would dig deeper to find out why are professors not teaching them in college? Why are they so? And basically, a few employees, more than one, said, "Well, we tend to not want to hear and read bad news, so therefore, it's not commonly, headline in the newspaper. The world's about to end due to this climate crisis and global warming." And increased rainfall and storms and so forth. So the idea that bad news should be buried or hidden or somehow maybe put away or stored somewhere separately, and other people also at work came to me and said, "Oh, it's because of this culture's focus on harmony, and if you have conflict, that's the opposite of harmony. So when your Constitution's first sentence says something about maintaining harmony, that's what every story becomes, is this idea of harmony." But it's not true in life, and it's not true in anything we do, that there isn't some conflict or challenge. It doesn't have to be a good guy and bad guy. It could be good people who want to achieve a great thing, but they have huge challenges to overcome to get there. Um, so,
I
um,
think basically, if you have watched any of the latest anime series, I
hmm,
think that line there is, you know, you can see it.
Mm.
Even in Kimetsu no Yaiba, also One Piece, and also
Oh,
in well, everything that has One Piece is pretty old actually. It's not new, but
mm,
Kimetsu no Yaiba and also the Haikyuu and everything. So you see all those characters there, the protagonists. They go through challenges, right?
mm.
So
Yes, I'm
once
sure.
again. So I think, and also mentioning, I remember when I came to Japan too. I came here in 2001. It was
Uh,
interesting because exactly as you said, bad news didn't make the news, right? The news emissions
right,
back then.
right.
But I have noticed a change there as well because nowadays, when I watch the morning news emissions, I can see that there are actually problematic issues that are being reported on.
Oh, really?
Yes, and it's of course it's not entirely bad news as it is in the West because I can tell you that back home, you cannot escape the bad news. It's
Uh,
everywhere to
yeah,
the point where people get depressed, right?
yeah, yeah, exactly.
So which is the other extreme. I don't
Right.
want that extreme either.
Yeah,
Uh,
I agree.
yes.
Yeah, super interesting. I was trying to see if I could find um, a document that I put together recently because I met a story. How do you call a screenplay writer for one of the anime and manga studios um, here in Japan, a foreigner from London, and he was telling us about this. And I don't know a lot about. I haven't watched a lot of anime or haven't read any manga, but he was telling us about this four-panel structure of manga. I can't remember the name for it, but it's the Japanese name for it is very simply describes essentially what the four panels deal with. And the idea is that, and maybe this is true in anime as well, is that these stories generally tend to be a series, right? So they continue on
Yeah.
and on and on. So they generally don't resolve. They
Hmm.
might have a mini resolution within the four panel or 8 or 12 panel manga, but he
Yeah.
was explaining how um, this is he felt like it's a very Eastern approach to this, and not that we don't have cliffhangers and drama series that go on and on and on in America or in the West, but he said the specific style of it and the way it's written here is different,
Yeah.
and so we were I was in actually I just reached out to him by email this week because I'm hoping he'll be a future storyteller. He was fascinating to listen to as he talked about story structure in Japan and in
Mm.
Asia. But
But it's also, I think that I would love to hear, what he has to say, because basically it's interesting how in the West, once again, culturally, we have grown up with the whole idea that we are the agents and we are the makers of our own destinies. And
mm,
so every resolution is possible, right? As long as we try
yes,
to resolve a problem, because we
yes,
are the agent. We have this ability to do it.
mm,
Which is funny because most of the time we don't. But anyway, we love the idea of that, right?
mm,
And then
right,
in Eastern Asia, it is more like people here see the world as a continuum, right? Every
mm,
situation is the result of the previous one. And then the current situation will have a continuation. The next situation will be based once again on this one. So the
yeah,
world never ends, right?
mm,
Which
yes.
is also
It sounds
fascinating. Yeah.
yeah, a little bit yeah, what is a little bit Shinto in
Yeah.
Shintoism in that it is kind of how I feel, and it reminds me actually. I won't tell the story because I wish Tim were able to be here to tell it, but it reminds me of Tim's story about when he was hiking and he sat down and looking at a beautiful view of Mount Fuji, and some Westerners came by and said something
Mhm.
about conquering it, but when the Easterners came by, the Japanese came by, they were basically in awe of the
Right.
spirit of the mountain
Hmm.
and the different mentality. I took that from Tim and I thought about it because it reminded me of growing up and how even though I grew up in one of the most beautiful natural areas in the world on the largest freshwater body of water in the world and surrounded by national forests in my parents' backyard and all around us in deep in nature, the terms we would use to describe things were always conflictive, like we were fighting against nature.
Yeah.
and I'm not thinking of a great example right now, but there's a million of them actually. So yeah, this idea of dominating and controlling and seeing something as a conflict as opposed to seeing it as, like you said, a continuum. This is
Yeah.
just, we're here for a while, and there's a continuum of nature and of, this story. It's going to go on and on.
Yes.
I was When we were talking about remembering in storytelling and why we remember through the neurons that connect, I forgot to also say something about the free drugs that the storyteller gives to the audience. And
Mm.
I'm
Yeah.
thinking to use this line when I introduce the storytellers next week on Thursday. Is There's this recent work by neuroscientists like Paul Zak and others in a recent, maybe last dozen years, where we only recently found out how much oxytocin is released into our
Mm.
brains when we're hearing a story that, again, that resonates with us. It must be a story that resonates. Can't be just any story. And before that, we knew oxytocin was released, for example, in a mother's brain when she sings a lullaby to a baby, or the baby's brain when she sings the lullaby. But now we understand that the same thing happens in storytelling. And what happens with oxytocin, which is known as the love drug, is we care. Basically,
Mhm.
we empathize, and we begin to care about what we're hearing or learning or knowing from the story. So we not only remember, but we care, and those two things together are quite powerful. That and which I think is why we evolved telling stories, and why we were able to survive because of
Mhm.
story.
Right. Yeah. It's fascinating because once again, when I think back about the summers I spent at my grandparents, the
Mm.
best my best memories, not only the best memories, but the things I remember the best are when we were sitting, me and my cousin and my grandma. So we were
Mm.
sitting out, at the porch, and she was telling us stories. She was
Yeah.
telling us
Wow.
stories from her childhood, about our relatives back then, her grandparents, and everything. So, and that would happen almost every afternoon, which was really wonderful. And it made the time in the heat of the summer so very much more enjoyable than us just running around, and
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
wondering
Yeah.
what to do.
Yeah. That's
Mm,
interesting, because you telling me that just now resonated with me because of my wife being Vietnamese. And when we go to Vietnam, and I always like to say a party breaks out, but it's not really a party. It's just a dinner.
mhm,
Suddenly, there's no organization, there's no texting, there's no emailing going around, there's no phone calls being made. Even neighbors will prop open their doors in apartment buildings and just come over and bring a dish, set it on the floor, start to roll out some mats, and everybody's sitting there. Somebody
yeah,
gets some beverages, and before you know it, there's 12 people sitting on the floor telling
mm,
stories,
yeah,
about their day or whatever, their school day or something. And I'm guessing that the children, like you, when you heard your grandmother telling those stories, are going to remember that part of their childhood more than anything else. Running around and playing with some plastic toys or something.
yeah.
But that really fascinates me now, and I wish, if I don't have any regrets, but if I had come to storytelling earlier, I know that I could have been a more effective architect and communicator, and perhaps you know I don't know, maybe accomplished something a little bit better, where in places where I certainly failed to deliver the result I wanted to see in the world. So yeah, my one of my partners in my firm back in Minnesota, he was quite gifted at using metaphors and
Mm,
analogies on the fly, which I never learned to do that. I was just in admiration of him as I watched him talk about his own design solutions for a project, and how he criticized his own designs in
mm,
front of the client live, using analogies and comparisons. And I would just think, what is he doing? He's,
yeah,
you know, and but he understood the intelligence of the human mind, that these people aren't going to pick a terrible design solution. They're going to pick the one that really, meets their needs. But he was basically using storytelling techniques, again, metaphors and analogies, for people to visualize something that didn't exist. It did
Yeah.
not, it's not here. I can't show you a 3D model of it on a computer yet, and it's not built or designed. So selling a future with storytelling, I think, could have been much more effective for me had I come to storytelling sooner. But
Mm. Yeah, we've got Binati Shet. She has been on the podcast quite a few times, and she's also very good at using metaphors and
mm,
comparisons. And I'm always in awe when I talk with her. But
mm,
yeah, such people. I mean, you just cannot get enough of them, right?
mm,
So,
mhm.
mm.
Yeah, I agree. I just think that that is a gift in and of itself. I think it's quite easy to look at something and, think about it for a while and maybe come up with a metaphor. But the people who do this tend to do it sort of, again, without preparation. I mean, they just come up with them and so
Oh,
quickly. And I wished
yeah,
I was better at that.
I would say that maybe reading a lot helps. Reading
Mm,
literature. I don't
yeah,
need, data and graphs and,
yeah.
let's say, corporate information.
There's
But
my problem. English class.
English class, well, I don't know. But I guess that when you reach a critical level
Mm,
of, let's say, reading, and
mm,
once again, I mean literature, literary
mm,
works,
mm.
eventually your brain starts working in that way as well.
I'm
But it's
sure.
it's different from storytelling still. I mean,
Right.
creating a story, as
Absolutely.
you said, right? But you get closer to being able
Yeah.
to use all those hacks on the go.
Yeah. 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 I'm sure you're absolutely right. Yeah. My adult daughter is really into literature, and I think her PhD from Oxford is in Spanish literature. And I'm
Mhm.
like, I don't have any interest in those areas. So I often send my stories to her for critique because I know that her brain certainly works far differently than mine, not having um, I had zero interest in English literature and any literature of any culture growing up, and I was stuck in data and facts and science and solutions that
Right.
were met the laws of physics, that worked, and I had no interest in fiction either. I was so narrow-minded. It wasn't until I had a colleague really introduce me to some fantastic fiction in my early years as an architect that I did begin to explore at least that genre. But yeah, I never became a. And my wife was. We have a house with multiple cultures here with Vietnamese, and of course the kids have to speak Japanese at
Mm.
school every day, and I drive English home to them every day. My wife will be asking some critical question about grammar structure in English and how do I know it?
Right.
I said, I don't remember going to any class, but we certainly did, I'm sure. But I'm sure I zoned out of these classes and completely was sketching or drawing in my notebook. I'm
Right.
certain I was, and don't remember. And she's saying, well, how do you know this one's right and this one's wrong? I, I don't know. I have no idea.
So what I have noticed, yes, because I studied English before I left Bulgaria, before I went anywhere actually.
Mm,
So the whole process of studying the language happened at home. And all
mm,
my teachers were Bulgarians who
mm,
were great speakers of English, right? And so I have come to believe because after I came to Japan, I have spoken with quite a few. I have a lot of American friends, and also British
mm.
friends. And sometimes when I ask them about this piece of grammar or that piece of grammar, they have difficulty explaining it.
Yeah,
But when I asked my non-native speakers of English teachers,
exactly.
they had absolutely no problem
Yeah.
explaining that. And I think it comes because before being able to use a foreign language or a second language, you have to understand how the grammar
Yes.
formed.
Agreed.
You need to know the syntax and everything. And for
Yes.
me personally, when I am asked by Japanese friends who are studying Bulgarian for some strange reason, to
Mm,
explain Bulgarian grammar, I remember classes. I took Bulgarian grammar classes when I was in junior high school and high school. I cannot explain it.
Right. Right.
So,
So
but yes,
yes, you're right on. I love it. That's a great story. And you just reconfirmed something for me that I realized who's teaching my 13-year-old son grammar, English grammar? Vietnamese cousin. He goes on every week. He's on, I don't know how many nights a week. He's studying English grammar from a Vietnamese teacher, his cousin. And that that really resonates, Maya, because your story is exactly right for me. And I thought it was because maybe my not being interested in it, but you're confirming it as a we just absorb it when it's native
yeah,
to our culture. So the same I think would be for storytelling. Maybe like you said earlier about Eastern and Western storytelling, this idea of the frameworks. There's many different story arcs or story
right.
journeys, a hero's journey, or whatever it might be. Um, but the style still is distinctly different, and sometimes even the solutions to the or resolutions, if you will, to the story, as we were talking about earlier, are quite different in various cultural contexts, I'm sure. And so that's why I guess in my storytelling community in Tokyo, I'm hoping at least to start with, and not just expats. I hope I will get more English speaking Japanese participants. I'm going to hopefully this time we have three women speakers. Two of them are Japanese. I'm hoping to have more of a balance of women and men, 5 and 5 if I can. Eight storytellers would be enough, but 10 is my target, and I'm going to work harder on that element if there is another storytelling venture here, so that I'll. And I do have already. I'm calling them new recruits already. People who've stepped up and volunteered to tell a story at the next event, and people have come to me telling me the outline of their story they want to tell, and these story events, by the way, are themed. But what I found with, and by theme, for example, it could be this first one we're doing is on changes, stories of transformation and transition. And it could be stories of, love hurts, broken hearts, and mended relationships or something like that. But what I found is it's quite easy to make almost any story fit any theme by the
Mm,
framing that we use.
right.
And maybe
Mm,
maybe it's harder to make a love story fit another theme, but you could always frame a love story around change. You could always frame a life and death story or a near death experience story of some kind of transformation occurred
mm,
because of the near death experience. So I think the theme of a storytelling event really is not as important as the way people see it, and interpretation varies by individual. I'm finding what people think is a story of change for them, might not seem like a big deal to others. It might seem
yeah.
like something very, very minor, but to them, it was quite transformational and huge in their life. So I've learned that just reading the people's stories that they submitted is quite interesting.
Right. Yeah. Well, I hope that we can continue this conversation because it's almost 9 o'clock, and this is the time when
Oh, yes.
we tell everybody thank you for being with us and
Okay.
listening. And yes, so, but yes, James, thank you very much for the time
Yes.
today and
Thank
for
you for the chance.
the
Always
great
nice to talk.
conversation. Yes, it's wonderful. So thank you very much for this. And
All right.
again, to everybody who stayed with us, that's Rick and Andrew, also Tim. Tim was here in spirit, and Matthew as well. Thanks for watching. To everybody who will watch this podcast later, let us know that you have been here. Hit like if you haven't subscribed or followed. Please do that as well to help us spread the word. And of course, if you have bought tickets for next week's event, enjoy it. If you haven't yet, hopefully James will have another one in the near future, and
Yes.
then you'll have a chance to attend. So that's all for today. I wish you a happy midweek, a productive reminder of this week, and all the best for the seasons. See you
Thank
next
you.
time. Thank you, James.